Good afternoon, everyone. It's Budget Day, the Super Bowl or All-Ireland final of days for tax people like me, but also for those who want to understand what the ministers have done for the country and to our wallets. My name's Peter Reilly. I'm the tax policy leader here at PwC Ireland, and I'm delighted to welcome you to today's tax policy series, Budget 2026 podcast. I'm grateful to be joined by a panel of experts who've been following every twist and turn of today's announcements. So I'd like to welcome Mandy Johnston. Mandy has held senior positions at the highest levels of government, politics, business and the media in Ireland. Doone, a tax partner in PwC Ireland's workforce tax practice, specialising in employment taxes. And Sinead, a deals tax partner with a particular focus on real estate, capital projects and the infrastructure sectors. Thanks, guys, so much for joining me. Mandy, I might start with you. When we sat here about 3 weeks ago, you said that the politics of all this would be quite interesting, and you referenced the presidential election. At that point in time, I was probably suspect as to whether it would actually have an impact or not. Has it had an impact, and what are the key political areas that are shaping the budget?
Well, I think happily it hasn't had too much of an impact on what the government have done here, and it had the potential to do that, but thankfully it hasn't. But I did also say that this is essentially the first budget in a 5-year cycle, and so with such a strong majority as the government have, that they should be able to do difficult things now and make hard choices now. And in framing this budget, they've been focusing on protecting the employment, protecting jobs, housing and infrastructure. And the question we were asking was, could they do all that? And could they wean the public off universal benefits and try and deal with cost of living issues in a different way? I suppose the big question in this budget is, and what they were trying to do is find a balance between demonstrating fiscal responsibility, fiscal credibility, and delivering some of the things that they had promised in the budget. And look, Pascal Donoghue set out himself his stall, and it was almost like going back a year. We were like back to the future when uncertainty was the buzzword. This time last year, they were in the run into the general election, if you remember. And today he went back to that narrative about uncertainty, that our economy is strong now, but we are facing headwinds. And they've very much framed the budget as a sensible budget that is protecting us for the future. It is a sensible budget. It isn't a game-changing budget, in my view. Perhaps on the housing front, it could be if they deliver on everything they say. But I think it will be seen as a responsible, sensible budget, and particularly in terms of getting their arms around public spending. They've stuck crucially to the figure that they outlined in the summer economic statement of 9.4 billion. They've even changed it a little, less on tax, more on the current side. But it's all about sending a signal. That's what the budget is. It's a piece of theatre.
Yeah, you're right in terms of what they're saying about uncertainty and stuff. And he was again, even saying if our economy is strong and when it's strong again in the future. He said that a couple of times during the speech, which I think is really interesting. Doone, what's your immediate reaction to the budget?
I'm not surprised, Peter, but I think we need to be very mindful going forward of hidden tax hikes. So we've had no personal tax package this year, so no changes to bans or credits. So what we could in effect see are tax increases by stealth. So wages are continuing to grow. Wage inflation in Ireland is running at about 4.5%. So if we don't have that corresponding adjustment to bans and credits, the average taxpayer is going to end up pay more tax. And previous budgets have offset that by adjusting credits or bans. Now we're going to see fiscal drag. So we're going to see more people dragged, pulled into the tax net. We're going to see more taxpayers move to the 40% tax bracket, and we're going to see tax credits lose their value in real terms. So if we couple the fact that we don't have an income tax package this year with the fact that we no longer have that kind of cost of living broad-based approach, it is a lose-lose situation for taxpayers, for families and for households. I know we're going to come on in a moment and talk about infrastructure, and look, we all get the need to invest in infrastructure and public services. The question for me is whether the pace of change from an infrastructural perspective can keep pace with the disappointment people are going to feel today of having nothing in their pocket. Like, what's in it for me? Very little. So for me, in terms of immediate reaction, not surprised, but we do need to be very wary of that fiscal drag.
It is amazing, actually, as you said, that there's no income tax package, and yet there's an awful lot in this budget. But before we get to that, Mandy, politically, no income tax package, that's unusual from on a political level. Is that going to have a political impact?
Yeah, we haven't seen a budget like this in many, many years. As Doone has said, normally there is these types of widenings of the bands to deal with inflation, and lots of talk for many years about that budgets should be linked to inflation anyway to deal with all those issues. But the reality is the VAT on hospitality and the apartments changes on VAT have literally gobbled up any possibility for personal tax changes. What the government are saying is that their priorities to protect jobs, to target supports, to support small and local businesses, and to do all that while they're investing and increasing supply. The government are about to be very, very badly hit by the government, by the opposition on this. This is the moment in time when all of that narrative around the uncertainty that has been building for a year, that this is the moment in time when the penny starts to drop for the public. They've been talking about economic uncertainty for a year now, and this is when it's going to hit the back pockets of the public. And yes, there will be a very politically difficult number of weeks ahead for the government because, again, we have an election coming, but they're going to have to weather that storm just at the time when people's household charges are getting greater and businesses are going to have to face more and more costs from a multitude of different angles.
Yeah, and I thought it was interesting that both ministers said, you know, this is the first in a 5-year budget cycle, right, trying to signal into the future, and also that Minister Donoghue said that, you know, we are still committed to doing things on income tax, but just not this year, right? We're going to do it in the future. Sinead, SMEs have been crying out for support for quite a period of time now. They're getting hit by an awful lot of headwinds at the moment. Did Budget 26 deliver anything meaningful for smaller businesses?
Yeah, it did. It had a number of measures, and I think, interestingly, where they started was trying to address some of those cost pressures. So we saw the much anticipated reduction to 9% on the VAT on food and catering hospitality. Interesting to see hairdressing put in there. That hadn't been expected, and I think will be welcomed. I think really, though, what this measure is going to do, I think the sector will say, is just enable it to stand still. So really what this is going to do is act as a subsidy to try and help them weather the increased cost in minimum wage, also the introduction of auto-enrolment pension. So I don't think you and I as consumers are necessarily going to see the benefit of this trickling through when we are in various establishments. We also saw the VAT on electricity and gas kept at 9%. It was due to go up to 13.5% actually this month, but critically extended out to 2030. So quite a significant extension. And again, I think that will give some certainty to businesses around, you know, at least planning for those costs and what that will mean. Interestingly, we did see an increase in terms of the revised entrepreneurial relief. We saw the lifetime limit there on gains increase from 1 million to 1.5. Not huge. It'll probably mean a saving of 115 or so thousand, but not insignificant either. And I think it was a point that Mandy just made. I think it's sending an important signal in terms of, you know, how critically important entrepreneurs are seen to our economy. Lastly then, I think interesting for the Minister, and welcome to see the Minister recognise the importance of the R&D regime also for SMEs. But I suppose what we've seen to date is really we haven't seen a significant number of SMEs being able to access the R&D regime. Essentially, the cost of them making the claim exceeded the tax benefit. So what we've seen there actually is a commitment to increasing the first year payment threshold from 75,000 to 87,500. So again, I think a really important support, and hopefully we will see this be more accessible to more SMEs.
And we might come back to R&D again in a few minutes, because there's been other changes there, Sinead. I'd also agree with you that people will hear about VAT rate reductions on hairdressing or on food, or indeed, electricity and gas, but these are maintenance items, so you're not really going to see it in your pocket. Just moving to infrastructure, Sinead, a really big theme of this budget, and it's been something that the government have been going on about for quite a while. Did the budget today back up what they've been saying with real investment and reform?
Again, if I'm being honest, I was sceptical enough. We heard that infrastructure was going to be a big theme. I thought it might have been just a regurgitation of some of the numbers in the revised National Development Plan. I have to say I'm pleasantly surprised in terms of the number of measures that have come through, predominantly in the whole area of housing, but obviously a chronic need there. And I would say, again, in terms of signalling, this is sending a really strong signal, both domestically and internationally, that we are absolutely open to finally, hopefully, cracking the supply issue in the whole area of housing. As I said, with a number of measures, and you'll have to bear with me here as I kind of take you down through and give you a flavour of some of them. So we saw the VAT reduction coming through on the sale of newly constructed apartments, so a reduction there from 13.5% to 9%. What this will kind of mean in terms of there's this much talked about viability gap of around 100,000 in terms of the cost of developing an apartment and the cost that a developer will or what someone is able to pay in order to purchase it. So this VAT rate reduction is expected to reduce that by around 20,000. Critically, though, we did also have a non-tax change earlier in the summer around some of the design specifications for apartments. Long story short, you'll be able to develop kind of smaller apartments with maybe less windows. More apartments can access lift shafts. That will also should translate to around a 20,000 viability deduction again. So that's a €40,000 decrease, which is not insignificant again. So I think really, really important move there on that. But critically, I think what we heard both Pascal Donoghue and Jack Chambers talk about and recognise, because look, tax, absolutely an important lever here, but it's systemic barriers that have caused the challenges. But they both acknowledged this and talked about, the need to streamline changes in planning reforms and things like that. So that's really positive to go alongside some of the changes.
And I think that's key, isn't it, right? Because we do need a package of measures right across. When you have an economic failure in something like housing, there's no silver bullet. Right? We need to be able to keep doing little bits here, little bits there, which will hopefully, increase the supply.
Absolutely. Now I'm not finished there. We have a bit to go. So residential zoned land tax, again, a land activation measure introduced a number of years ago. We've encountered and clients have encountered a number of practical difficulties with the application of that tax. Yes. This was recognised today with Pascal Donoghue, Minister Donoghue, saying that he's going to bring forward changes in the finance bill to address a number of these. Obviously, devil in the detail there, but again, really positive signal and will be welcome.
And he was also keen to say that, because there's been, 2,500 returns or whatever it was, that it's working, right? He was keen to say it's working.
Absolutely. We saw a couple of measures in the whole area of affordable housing, so a new corporation tax exemption on rental profits derived from cost rental developments, and also an enhanced corporation tax deduction for qualifying expenditure on apartment construction. What this is expected to lead to is around a 50 grand deduction in terms of the cost on apartments. So again, not insignificant. And when you start to kind of put this together as a package of measures, it really starts to be quite compelling. Also some measures there around the conversion of non-residential buildings to support, and also to support conversion of kind of over-the-shop premises. Again, just to give a nod back to planning, great to see the tax relief there, but there is certain planning and regulatory constraints so again will be interesting to see if this can actually move the dial.
And if they can couple those together, it's just going to be so important, because we probably have an oversupply in certain areas of our commercial property, and so if we can kind of change that into residential, it'd be huge, right?
I'll be brief. I'm still going here. Living City Initiative, so changes to, that's an existing regime. Again, I think actually 2030 is another theme that came out strongly in the budget. A lot of measures extended to 2030. But again, that sends a really strong message. It's not these kind of incremental 1 year, 2 years. People can really plan and commit to investment, which I think is important. But this initiative also extended. We also saw 5 new regional centres brought into the mix there. And actually, being honest, this regime hasn't been that impactful to date, but we are seeing a number of proposed changes. A key one in that it's going to now apply to buildings that were built before 1975 as opposed to 1915. So this is going to open that up massively. Changes proposed to the stamp duty residential rebate scheme, again extended. But critically, I think a key cash flow measure here, they're going to allow for a full refund on multi-phase developments when the first phase has commenced. So again, that's a massive cash flow impact for anyone that's within that regime. It wasn't all carrot, though it's important to say the Minister did talk about a new derelict property tax. So this is going to replace the derelict site levy, which again, there's questions over how impactful that has been. Critically, this has now been brought into under the remit of revenue. Won't actually be introduced until at least 2027, but he did signal that the rate will be consistent with the current rate, which is around 7%. And lastly, just to give a nod to the Irish real estate regime, so this is a critical regime, particularly for overseas investment. Its effectiveness has probably been significantly impacted due to a number of changes in previous years and in previous budgets. I think the Minister acknowledged the effectiveness of this regime and the need to simplify it, which we would absolutely support and echo, and would have indeed called upon in our own pre-budget submission. So again, a really strong signal to both domestic but particularly international investors as well.
Yeah, indeed, there's a lot there, right? And there is a lot for people to kind of go through over the next number of days. We did call for a number of these things, and it's great to see some of these things actually coming through. I also think it is great to see not just one change in an area of need, but a number. And as we say, we hope that that'll extend outside of tax. Generally, Mandy, on infrastructure, they made a lot of promises around energy, water and transport. Have they gone or done enough to deliver on these credible, or are they credible in some of these major projects?
Yeah, I think since the government came back in, in the programme for government, they demonstrated that they had the ambition to solve these issues and an awareness that they needed to move quickly because these things take a long time to change, right? So I was very interested in what Jack Chambers said today about reforming the process being as important as the money and accelerating things like the infrastructural task force, which he said would report back to him next month with key changes on the planning scene. Their credibility isn't just financial, it is about the ability to move things. And they don't have a tremendous amount of time, believe it or not, to do that. I know we're going to talk about housing in a moment, but there was a €2 billion investment in water and energy, which is great to have that money. Can they actually deliver the changes that they need? And the suite of measures that they announced is certainly comprehensive when it's taken in totality. Their challenge now will be to push them forward. And the issue they've had with whether it's investors looking in at us, is that credibility about moving the system. So it's still untested, but they do demonstrate an ambition to move, and I think this is a good start.
Doone, from a personal perspective on the housing side of things, what did we see today?
Yeah, a few measures here to note from the perspective of different stakeholders, if you like. So for renters, the rent tax credit is being extended. So it's been extended out until 2028, but it's been maintained at its current rate. And that is despite a commitment in the programme for government to progressively increase it. So it's been held at €1,000 for a single individual. Now, the national average rent on new tenancies is increasing at about 6.4% year on year, so it remains to be seen how that stacks up going forward. Tenants in rent pressure zones, I expect, will be disappointed that nothing additional was done for them. So on the 1st of March 2026, there will be reforms to rent pressure zones, which will effectively and include lifting that rental cap. It's currently capped at 2%. So going forward, those rents would be governed by the rate of inflation. So tenants in those areas would have hoped for an increased rental tax credit in order to shelter them from some of the immediate increase in rents. For those looking to get on the property ladder, no change to the Help to Buy scheme. It is on the statute books already until 2029, so we probably weren't expecting anything major there. For homeowners, mortgage interest relief has been extended for another 2 years, so 25 and 26. So that'll be welcome for those who've seen mortgage rate increases. And not a budget day announcement, but one for people to note is that the 1st of November, so coming very quickly, is a revaluation date for local property tax. So the last time we had that revaluation was 2021. If you think about what happened to property prices and what is happening between 21 and 25, you can anticipate a significant increase in LPT charges. Now, the government is looking to offset some of that by widening the bands and reducing the rate. Nevertheless, Department of Finance forecasts is that if your house is valued up to 1.2 million, you're likely to face a 5 to 6% increase in your LPT charge. Anything between 1.2 and 2.1 is likely to trigger between a 7 and a 14% increase. So costs on the horizon for homeowners in that regard.
God, it really is that there are, going back to your point, there's a lot of hidden things coming through, Doone, right? Did the budget go far enough then to address cost of living for households?
So obviously with the absence of a broad-based cost of living package, what they said there'd be very targeted measures. If we leave aside rent, which we've spoken about, the 3 other household bills that are very sizable are energy, childcare, depending on obviously age groups, and food. Energy, if we take 2021 as a comparative year, electricity prices have gone up 69%. Gas prices have more than doubled. They're at 102%. What have we seen? We know that there's no energy credit. Sinead, you mentioned the extension of the 9% VAT rate, that reduced VAT rate for gas and electricity bills up until 2030. But at the same time, scheduled carbon tax increases are coming into play. So limited reprieve if you take all of those in the round. Childcare, the OECD reported recently that Irish families pay more than double the OECD average for childcare. The focus of today's announcement seems to be on capacity, so on places. There's also a planned increase to the minimum wage for certain categories of childcare workers due to come into effect on Monday. That's focused on attraction and retention into the industry. But we are a long way off the pre-election promise of €200 per month per child. So there's a way to go in that. And then food is the next largest bill, I suppose, faced by households. Food price inflation is running at an extremely high level. It's running at double the normal or the standard rate of inflation.
And referenced by the Minister today.
Absolutely. So it's currently running at about 5.1%. Beef prices have gone up a quarter in the last year. Milk, butter, cheese, all double-digit price growth. The difficulty here for the government is that there's no subsidy scheme or no tax adjustment that they can make to directly impact that. So prices are dictated by global supply chains, cost inputs, retail margins that central government has no direct involvement in. So I think food is going to be the most stubborn sticking point for the government when it comes to that cost of living crisis that people are really feeling.
Okay, thanks, Doone. Mandy, politically, right, we look at housing or indeed cost of living and we say, what is that politically going to mean for the coalition, right? The houses are going to take a while to get built.
100%.
Yeah, and just on the cost of living issue, which is kind of, it's a similar one in a different way, if you like, because the Minister used some very specific language about both of them. He kept talking about 5 years and he kept talking about choices. And what they're telling you in that statement of intent is they realise that they have choices to make, and these are the choices that are going to work out best for you as a taxpayer in the long run. So they're aware that there's political pain on the way for them. So on the cost of living crisis, I mean, I just think when you take all the property tax, the carbon tax, plus tiny but significant in terms of tax increases, mission creep along that line, it's just going to be a very difficult couple of months for consumers and households, and it's going to be a very difficult couple of months for the government as a result of that. On the housing front, you tend to think of the housing and the supply issue as something that the government might be able to deal with one or two things. The reality is it is a comprehensive suite of measures that is required, and they're littered throughout the budget. So if I were them, I would put all that together and present it in a very determined way, because housing isn't just an issue for us here domestically. It's not just a societal issue. It's also an intrinsic part of how we can attract foreign direct investment
100%.
and make external companies believe that we have the capacity to host new companies and to allow people to live here in the longer term. One good thing that I do think, although it's painful politically now, that I think is coming across in this is more longevity of thinking. even the small issues like the 5 years commitment to the energy reduction on VAT, on the EVs and things like that, it just demonstrates a longer term vision, if you like, than we might have seen in recent years, when spending has basically gone completely out of control. And the budget last year they were warning about all the uncertainty that lay ahead, still delivered, and then some in terms of spending. So this is a difficult time to try and pull back, but I think that's what is in here.
I think you're right as well. If we look at them sitting there and saying, okay, we've 5 years, the best time to weather the storms today.
Totally.
5 years' time, we're hoping, that they will have housing fixed, infrastructure projects, at least started. So, that you'll be able to say to the electors, look, because of some of the choices we've made. Sinead, multinationals and FDI, right? If we look at those, were there any surprises, and did the government address competitiveness concerns?
I think one surprise that might have actually gone under the radar so far, and something that actually wasn't in either of the speeches, but we've picked up as we've been kind of sifting through some of the supporting documentation, is around potential changes to the IP allowances and 291A. So I think, look, we're still unpicking that, to be honest, as to what that will mean. But I think FDI and people here that are currently availing of that regime will be watching that closely. Yeah,
that's a financial resolution which is going to pass through the Dáil this evening, which appears to be in relation to balancing allowances. So if you sell the IP and you get an upfront allowance, that allowance would only be able to be used against IP income rather than other income. We're still working through the detail on it, but absolutely it was probably something that we weren't expecting.
And I think the challenge with that as well, or quite often, and look again, going back to my property side of things, when things haven't been well received in the past, it's when they haven't been signalled. So again, that's just my nervousness around that, because there's a lot of good in this, but that potentially may taint it. I suppose what we did see in terms of trying to address competitiveness, and we touched upon it earlier, was an increase to the R&D tax credit rate. It's moved to 35% from 30%. I suppose some of the noise beforehand was, would it go to 32? I think it's really positive to see them again make that really strong statement and go to 35. We have, Ireland Inc. has been really successful in attracting high value investment activities here, but I think it's critical that we continue, to be able to do that. And I think by sending a signal going as far as 35%, it will hopefully enable us to remain at the forefront of locations for attracting R&D. The Minister also referenced a compass, an RD compass, but I think essentially, it could go any direction. But look, what he did say was he will touch on targeted changes to the R&D tax credit to better align with industry practices in the areas of outsourcing and qualifying expenditure definitions. Again, areas that we would have called upon ourselves in terms of our response to the consultation, our pre-budget submission, and the industry as a whole, I think will welcome that, and it's needed. The regime is around a long time, and it probably there's elements of it that just need to keep pace. There's also a pathway for the development of innovation supports. If I'm being honest, positive to see the pathway. What does that mean? So a bit disappointing not to have something a bit more tangible around that. And again, I think there's critical areas around digitalisation, green technology that we absolutely have to be playing in those areas, and we run the risk of if we spend too long maybe on pathways that we kind of miss our opportunity. So again, a little disappointing on that one. Back to the positives, Minister did touch upon a simplification for businesses. Again, the detail of that to follow, but really welcome, something that would be called upon and definitely needed. He also talked about an action plan for the reform of interest that's due to be published today. So again, I think that'll be really well received, but people will be waiting to understand what is in that, and there's a feedback statement also to come. And also, again, more detail to come in the finance bill around reforms on the participation exemption on foreign dividends. Again, I think that is welcomed, but I feel like I'm really repeating myself here, devil in the detail. And actually, as I even reflect on what I've just gone through there, not so much from a tangible perspective other than the move on the R&D tax credit rate. A lot of what we will do in pathways.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think when we talk about pathways, compasses and action plans, right, we want action today on some of
Yeah.
these now. I think it is absolutely positive that they're going to move on these. I think the key point is going to be execution,
Yes.
right? Can we execute on these quickly? So if we say we're going to bring in an innovation credit, can we do it quickly, right? If we're going to change interest, why do we have to do that over a multi-year cycle? I think we need to make policy decisions and move on them. I think it's really important. Then just lastly on participation exemption, as you said, it does seem that they are going to make some targeted changes there, which we would have called for. Probably not go the whole way that we would have asked for, but you're right, we won't see everything in that until we get to next week. Then Doone, for the employers, was there anything unexpected, in terms of tax changes and incentives?
No major surprises. Anything that was announced, Peter, is probably in the area of extensions or enhancements of what was already there. So we saw an extension and improvement about the Special Assignee Relief Programme and the Foreign Earnings Deduction, both of which are critical to maintain competitiveness. So Special Assignee Relief Programme supports businesses attracting overseas talent. Your point around housing is really well made. Foreign earnings deduction is around helping businesses expand into overseas markets. Really important given where we are in terms of trade and tariffs. Some enhancements also flagged, including the simplification for claiming SARP. We have called for that for a number of years, so devil in the detail, really interested to see what that is. And then there's also an increase in the relief for FED. The KEEP regime was also extended to 2028, subject to state aid approval. And then there's also some relief for company cars. So if nothing had been done, we would have seen an increase in the company car BIK across all cars from next year. Instead, we're seeing an extension of the €10,000 deduction in original market value for 26. That'll taper out 27, 28. And there's also some positives for those with electric vehicle fleets and employees with high business mileage also. So some positive news there. But as Mandy and I have been talking about, a lot of the narrative in the budget was around protecting jobs. But actually, when you strip that narrative back, the cost of employing people is actually increasing. So this month alone, we've had the scheduled increase in PRSI for employers and employees. There are further increases due right up until 2028. We have pension auto-enrolment, which Sinead, you mentioned at the start, kicking in January 26. We have the minimum wage increases announced today, due to commence on the 1st of January. That's a 25% increase in minimum wages over the last 3 years. And then on the horizon, we have the EU Pay Transparency Directive due to be transposed into legislation here by June 26, which is going to increase the compliance burden, but also the compliance cost on businesses as well. So the narrative and the reality just need to be minded.
Go ahead.
I think the reason why protecting jobs was such a significant narrative in the run-up to this budget and during it, there's two reasons. The first, I'll be a little cynical on it. I think the government are already facing a lot of pushback on that 9% VAT reduction in the hospitality sector, politically speaking. I think a lot of economists don't really understand why it was done. I think it stems out of a political commitment in the run-up to the election, and I think it caused a lot of tension internally in the government's own kind of dynamic in the first couple of months. It says it's protecting 191,000 jobs, and that's fair enough. It does then juxtapose that against the FDI employment, which is 30,000. So they're on a big crusade to justify that. The second, I do think, is more substantial and real, really, is because I don't think it's just about protecting the jobs we have. I think they realise that with everything that's happening around us in the US, they need to diversify markets. They need to go out into the world, create more employment here, certainly protect Indigenous companies to the best of their ability. But I think that protecting jobs, and he mentioned it today, they want to maintain full employment. Yeah. And that's what could get tricky, you know, in the months and years ahead. But I think that's why employment has been so significant in this budget.
It's really interesting. One sentence each on each of these. The biggest win, the biggest disappointment, and the biggest unanswered question from Budget 2026. Doone, I might start with you.
For employment, Peter, the biggest win is probably those changes to SARP, FAD, KEEP and company cars. For individuals, I think the biggest disappointment is that there isn't an income tax package. So people are going to feel that kind of fiscal drag. And I think the biggest unanswered question for me is whether the momentum or the pace that we can mobilise that infrastructure investment is actually going to offset the disappointment of fiscal drag, which realistically is going to hit when the next electricity or gas bill lands on the doormat or in the inbox, and you don't have that energy credit that you had last year to offset it or soften that blow. So it's that time difference between the two.
Great. Sinead?
You might afford me some long sentences, but I think the biggest win, there's two. I think the R&D regime, the commitment to the extension on the credit rate is really positive, and the commitment to broader reform. I think the suite of package of measures around housing is really positive. I think it is sending a strong message. I think the biggest disappointment, we touched on the innovation incentive. Great to have the pathway. Would have liked to have seen some action. And I think as well, something we haven't touched upon, climate didn't really feature. Sorry, there's elements of it, but no bigger measures. And I think that is a bit of a disappointment, and quite interesting. The lack of measures on that, and that's maybe quite telling. Biggest unanswered question, probably back to the housing measures. It's going to be a number of years, I think, till we see the real proof in the pudding on that. So that's probably the unanswered question. But I'd be hopeful that we will start to see significant change there.
Super, Sinead. And Mandy, same to you.
Yeah, I think the housing stock, bit of longer term thinking certainly seems to be evident, and an attempt at least to keep spending under control. I think the biggest loser or negative about this is people are going to find it difficult as this winter comes in, whether it's a personal household issue or a business, and they're about, when I say they, government are about to come under a significant amount of political pressure for not doing enough to support them. Jack Chambers mentioned an infrastructure project, Ardna Crusher there, when he was talking about the endeavour and what is possible for us in the future. And I think that's the biggest unanswered question for me on project delivery. Can they make the system move, and can they make it work for them? And it's not 5 years, it's actually 3 years, because that's when the turnaround will happen, and that's the next push point for political instability.
Super. Thank you so much. Well, that's all for our instant reaction to Budget 2026. I'd like to thank Mandy, Doone and Sinead for all of your insight and input. You got through an awful lot in a relatively short period of time. We'll be back with deeper analysis once the dust settles on the finance bill, details emerge, and we will have a webcast on Friday week, so that's Friday the 17th of October, where we'll go through the details of the finance bill. There was a lot more in the budget today than we've been able to get through, so you can read our full breakdown of budget analysis at pwc.ie/budget. And I really appreciate you joining us today. Thanks.